And let's get into probably the most heated story since last night. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Israel has decided to strike back at Iran. So in another way, it's kind of like if we were watching Star Wars, I do kind of feel like Israel is the empire, right? And I feel like, you know, Iran or, you know, also Gaza is Return of the Jedi. They're the Jedi, you know. That's kind of how I look at it. If you haven't seen Star Wars, my apologies. But the empire was like the evil empire, Darth Vader and all that jazz. And that kind of reminds me of Israel. So they did strike back. Now, before we get into what happened last night, I want to show you what happened 1 hour before Israel decided to strike Iran. There was actually this interview on CNN with Aaron. Thank you so much for this, Squid Diddley. CNN, exactly 1 hour before Israel attack on Iran. Did they know?
And Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian. And Mr. Foreign Minister, thank you so much. Israel has vowed to retaliate against the Iranian strike over the weekend. Do you think Israel could strike as soon as tonight? And Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian. And Mr. Foreign Minister, thank you so much. Israel has vowed to retaliate against the Iranian strike over the weekend. Do you think Israel could strike as soon as tonight?
So that apparently was 1 hour before Israel decided to attack Iran. Now, it appears they attacked nuclear sites. We're going to get into all of that. I think the first video that we saw, or I saw, was the one from MSNBC. Let's go ahead and get into this here. Again, you have to remember, how did we get here? Let's always ask ourselves that question. How did we get here? Israel, again, has been the aggressor. They decided to attack the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and Iran said that they would retaliate, that they would strike back. They did so. And Joe Biden actually made an announcement saying, don't do it, to Israel, not to strike back at Iran. But Bibi basically said they're going to do what they want to do. And they did. Let's get into it.
We are monitoring breaking news in Iran. For more, we're going to be joined now by NBC News, Pentagon and National Security correspondent Courtney Kube. Courtney, what do we have?
So, Lawrence, there has been some breaking news all this evening that we've been trying to get more detail on. Here's what we know so far. According to Iran's semi-official state media, that's Fars, they are saying that there have been a series of explosions in Iran, in a city called Isfahan. Now, why a lot of our viewers may have heard of that city is because it's where some of Iran's critical nuclear infrastructure exists. But so far, it seems that these explosions are not specifically in Isfahan, where the nuclear facility is, but are nearby. Now, the U.S. officials are not saying anything about this. Neither are Israeli officials. But of course, this all comes when there has been this back and forth between Iran and Israel and threats from both sides. Now, of course, on April 1st, the Israeli military struck a site in Damascus, which was later determined to be some sort of a consular site, killing a number of senior Iranian officials, including a senior general in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
And they expected Iran not to respond after that. Right. So if we look at the situation in Gaza, we look at the situation in the West Bank, we look at, because Israel's not just attacking Iran, they're also attacking Lebanon and Syria. We look at the situation of all these countries. Who has been the aggressor? It has been Israel. Israel likes to throw stones and hide their hand. Like if we were on the playground and we were kids, Israel is the kid that walks up to another kid and punches them in the face, and then they run away and don't let you hit them back. But then the next day, when you come back to the playground, after you've been punched in the face, you decide you're going to punch Israel back in the face. So you go back up to the other kid and you punch the other kid back in the face. And then Israel is the kid that runs to the teacher and cries and says, they're attacking me. Totally leaves out that they were the one that hit first. That's Israel on the playground. Now, if you think about this, and we're looking at what's happening here, this location here is Fran. So this isn't that far from Tehran, right? Not that far from it. And this is kind of like Israel's way, I think, of sending a message. You know what I mean? Let me take this these captions off. This is kind of their way of sending a message. Now, I want you to look at this map. Look at how large Iran is and look at the size of Israel. Okay. Do you think it is wise, and continue considering the type of weapons that Iran has? Do you think it is wise for Israel to attack Iran? Do you think it's wise? Because I don't think it's wise. I feel like Israel is trying to drag us into World War III. And I mean, drag us, all of us, because if this continues to escalate, they're not going to fight this conflict alone. The next thing you know, which Biden has already hinted towards, the next thing you know, they're going to be trying to send U.S. troops to go fight this war as well. And my message to all of you that are in the military, if you're eligible to leave, now would be the time to exit. All of you who were thinking about joining the military, now would be the time to change your mind. Because the last thing that you want to be involved in is another conflict in the Middle East. This is serious. Iran is not like some little rinky-dink country that doesn't have, advanced weapons. They have advanced weapons, and you should be concerned about the fact that this could escalate in any way, shape, or form.
Of course, we know, Lawrence, that last weekend, Iran retaliated with pretty great force, about 300 projectiles, missiles, and drones, most of which were shot down. But Israel again vowed to respond. Now, among the possible response options that we have been hearing about this week that Israel briefed the U.S. on ahead of the strikes last weekend was the possibility of some sort of a response inside Iran, but also the possibility of strikes against proxy forces and against Iranian facilities outside of Iran. There are also some reports tonight of explosions in Syria and in Iraq. But I really have to stress at this point, we do not have any confirmation who was behind any of these explosions, these possible strikes, other than to say everyone has really been waiting on edge to see if Israel would respond to this massive volley of strikes that they took against Israel, that Iran took against Israel on Saturday, Lawrence.
Now I want to add this part too. They attacked Iraq. Why? They're dragging Iraq. This is what I'm saying. They're not just attacking one. They're going after Gaza. They're assaulting people in the West Bank. They've been bombing Lebanon and Syria. Now Iraq, as well as Iran. They're really trying to have a full-scale World War III. And I say World War III because who do you think the other countries are going to back? Think about this for a second. Do you think Russia is going to back Iran or Israel? My bet is on Iran. And if China were to get involved, who do you think China is going to back? You think China is going to also back Israel? So the European countries and the United States would be backing Israel. But do you really want to have any type of war with Russia and China and Iran? Can't forget about BRICS.
And Courtney, this is ahead of where our information is now, but a few days from now or whatever amount of time it takes, when would we have or could we have an accurate assessment, damage assessment of what might have actually occurred tonight?
So we're already seeing, frankly, some social media video of explosions over the skies in Isfahan. There's some things that are starting to come out from both Iraq and Syria. So we may get a better sense of that in the next day or so. It's about.
Yes, you can said the reports on them attacking Iraq were false, Sabby. Okay. Yeah, MSNBC, you need to fix this. Because I was like, why would you go after Iraq?
About daylight in all three locations right now, Friday morning. So we may get a sense of that. The real question, though, is will we get any attribution to this? Now, keep in mind, there's a widespread knowledge that Israel has taken a number of strikes inside Syria in recent years, specifically usually going after Lebanese Hezbollah, going after shipments of component parts, advanced missile parts that Iran ships to Hezbollah in Syria. And they very rarely, if ever, acknowledge any of those strikes. It would not surprise me if we don't have any statement of attribution for who is behind these, except for the fact that Israel's been vowing to respond here. So, again, I have to say, we still don't know who or what caused these explosions in these 3 locations. We've been working on this feverishly for a matter of hours now, Lawrence, and we'll continue. But at this point, again, the U.S. and the Israelis are not saying anything. And even Iran, while acknowledging there have been explosions, is not saying who or what was behind them.
But we all have common sense and we all knew, right? So this is when it was first reported last night. I do have updated information for today as well.
Juby, Pentagon correspondent, thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. We're going to come back to you as this story develops. And joining us now is Ben Rhodes, who served as Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama. He's an MSNBC political analyst. Ben, on the issue of attribution, will the United States issue a statement of having nothing to do with it, possibly?
Yeah, that's quite possible. And in fact, Lawrence, in the past, even when Israel has taken strikes against Iranian targets in third countries, in places like Lebanon and Syria, sometimes the United States does put out a statement to clarify that it itself was not involved. That said, I mean, it's not a mystery, if you have this kind of attack, particularly if it's in Isfahan and if it's against Iranian proxies in places like Iraq and Syria. I don't think there's going to be a ton of mystery around it. I think what we can say with assurance is that the United States itself did not participate in that kind of military activity.
Let's pause here for a second, because they always try to wash the hands of the United States government, right? Who is giving Israel the weapons? That is coming from the United States. I think Germany is second. But we are supplying most of the weapons to Israel. If the U.S. government stopped giving that aid to Israel, would Israel be able to have all these attacks? So we can't just sit here and pretend like the United States government doesn't have any involvement whatsoever. Of course, they would get the Obama official. Of course.
To expect in terms of the unfolding of this information at this hour? When might we hear something from more clear or something official from the Pentagon?
Well, I think that, it's likely that, assuming Israel carried out these strikes, they would notify the United States, probably shortly beforehand. If they did carry out strikes inside of Iran at a place like Isfahan, that obviously would go against what Joe Biden had counseled them, which is to not directly retaliate against Iranian territory. I think the U.S. has a greater degree of tolerance and understanding of Israeli strikes against Iranian proxies across the region. But even in the event in which the Israeli government knows that the Biden administration might not support their action, they would still notify the United States. I think that it's
do we honestly believe that, ladies and gentlemen, that they would absolutely do that, considering the fact that Netanyahu has basically said over and over again, when it comes to this conflict, he doesn't care what the United States government says. He's going to do what he wants to do. So do we really believe that they would play by the rules? They haven't been playing by the rules all this time, committing war crimes, killing children. And we believe that they would play by the rules. A little bit more here, and then we'll go to the next.
Necessary, though, to wait and see whether this is the conclusion of a military action. Is this a series of kind of one-off strikes in Iraq and Syria and Iran, or is it the beginning of several strikes that could take place in different places? I think the U.S., before it comments in any formal way, would obviously want to know and be certain that this latest round of escalation has concluded. So, I'd expect that to happen kind of over our night. But again, I think the U.S. will also take some lead from whether or not Israel is publicly commenting, publicly taking responsibility for these strikes. Given how much Israel said that it was going to respond, even though it's sometimes been reluctant to claim responsibility for certain military actions, given how far they've been out there saying they're going to respond, I have to assume we get some confirmation from the Israeli side too in the coming hours.
Okay. That was last night. Let's move on a little bit here because I do want to move forward because, of course, the White House press secretary was questioned about this action. Now, Asal Rod, she's actually been on RBN a couple times. She actually shared this. I want you to hear how Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary for Joe Biden, I want you to hear how she responds to these attacks.
In the Middle East, why is it that you don't have any comment at this time? It's been several hours since the reported strike. Certainly that's enough time for the administration to investigate and come up with something to say.
I'm just going to be really mindful, just going back to what I said just before I called on you to ask me this question. I'm not going to speak or speculate about any of the reports that are out there. I'm not going to comment, and I'm just going to leave it there.
Your strategy to de-escalate?
Look, I'm going to, again, be super mindful, and I get the interest, obviously. I understand the interest, and going to be disappointing many people here this afternoon. I just don't have anything to share. I'm not going to speculate on the reportings out there. You heard the same. Obviously, you said what we've been saying. Going to be mindful because...
Let me pause for a second. So this was actually this afternoon, not last night. And she has obviously been ordered not to respond about the attack on Iran. Why are you there? Why are you a part of this press conference? What is the point of the press secretary? You're just like, I don't want to respond. I don't want to make any assumptions or anything like that. Like, why are you holding this press conference?
Because I'm not going to speak or speculate to any of the events from last night. And I know you all have a lot of questions on this. I get it. I understand. I want to be mindful here. Going to be mindful here. I'm not going to speculate or speak on any of the events that's been reported.
Official response, and given that U.S. taxpayers give more than $3 billion each year for military defense systems to Israel, shouldn't Americans have a response from this administration more than 12 hours after this attack?
I appreciate the question, and I understand the importance of the American people, who, you are correct, they are taxpayers. And I want to be incredibly mindful here, and I understand the interest here, and I am going to continue to say I'm not going to speak to this or speculate about the reports out there. That's not going to change, and just going to be super mindful.
I think she's in the wrong gig. I think maybe she should have been a counselor or something like that, with maybe she should have been a counselor the way that she speaks. I'm going to be very mindful here. Oh, so you just told me that you just punched your friend in the face and that you want to drag him. I'm going to be very mindful here. I don't want to speculate anything. And that's all I can really say at this point. Maybe she should have been a counselor instead. It is the next day after this attack. The next day. You don't know anything. Even if you did know something, you were told not to say anything. She's a puppet. She's another puppet. So she's been told not to say anything. Why? Probably because it was already ordered that Israel was not supposed to respond. That was the demand. Do not respond. You're even, let it go, don't respond. And Israel decided to respond anyway. They're not listening to what the U.S. government is saying. And yet here we got our Congress members arguing about whether or not to give aid to Israel. Why would you continue giving aid and weapons to a country that's not even listening to you during the time of war? So why would you continue to give them? Get out of here. So the interesting part about all this is that when you look at it, when you look at Karine Jean-Pierre, she probably knows more but she was told not to say anything. What good are these positions, right? These people are just puppets. That's kind of how I look at it. But it's interesting. And that's why they don't want to say anything, because it shows that Israel defied the order from the president. And no one should be surprised because they're not listening to anybody. This is what happens when you allow a country not to have any accountability for years while they've been slaughtering, imprisoning Palestinian people, occupying Palestinian people. This is what happens when there's no accountability. When they've been bombing Syria and Lebanon and there's no accountability there. This is what happens. Israel is out of control. And now all of a sudden the president expects Israel to listen. They haven't been listening all this time. It's embarrassing.
Just ask you, has the president been briefed on these reported events that you don't wish to speculate on?
So I knew some humor would be coming in, and I appreciate the humor. Speculate on those events or any of the reports that are out there, and I know that is not satisfying to all of you, but that is where we are.
Puppet. Notice too how they always put, like most of the time, and you'll see this as well, the next one, most of the time they bring forward, it's usually a black face to deliver this news. Just like the woman who raises her hand at the UN Security Council to veto everything in the United States name. Notice these things. Now, I want to show you this clip in reference to this. It was on Piers Morgan. Now, this gentleman here, he was on Piers Morgan. And I want you to listen to the first couple minutes of this, some of the things that he debunks about Iran, because Piers Morgan, and I think, honestly, a lot of Americans just don't fully understand how a lot of the countries in the Middle East operate. They see them as a monolith. They're not a monolith, right? And they also tend to have negative views about some of those Middle Eastern countries, including Piers Morgan. So listen to this, because I think Piers Morgan got schooled here.
You know quite well, I know quite well, your viewers know quite well that the Israeli regime is carrying out genocide. And this stems from an ethno-supremacist ideology. It stems from apartheid, and this is unacceptable. And the people who lived on that land, they have been expelled. The people in Gaza, they live in a concentration camp, now a death camp. And the West has brought about this situation. Whatever crimes that they've committed against Jews and Gypsies and Slavs, they have to pay for it themselves. They can't take it out on the Palestinian people. So the Iranians, along with almost everyone else in the world, except for some people in your part of the world, believe that the apartheid regime has to come to an end. And by coming to an end, it means that all people of that land have to be able to live as equal human beings. I know that sounds very crazy, but ethno-supremacism isn't a good thing.
But the position of the Iranian regime is that Israel shouldn't exist, right?
Well, the position of the British regime is that Israel as an apartheid state should continue to exist. The position of the American regime is that Israel is...
If you could, look, that wasn't the question I asked you, but is the position of Iran's regime...
I'm answering.
That is, but what is the answer to that question?
I'm getting there. The position of the American regime is that apartheid should continue. Iran's position on South Africa had the same gap. There was the same gap back then when the British and the Americans supported apartheid in South Africa and racial supremacism in the South African region, Zimbabwe today, and so on. Back then, Iran was supporting the indigenous population. Back then, Iran supported the ANC. Back then, Iran supported the military wing of the ANC and Nelson Mandela.
But we're not talking about South Africa. I'm talking about what is...
So the point that he's trying to make, I think this is Professor Morandi, the point that he's trying to make is they want the apartheid regime to end. They want the apartheid has to go, right? How is that so difficult to understand? And people like Piers Morgan and other MSNBC and Fox News and CNN pundits, they will take that out of context and they will say that Israel, they want all the Jewish people to die in Israel. That is not what they are saying at all. They want the apartheid to end. Let's be real and let's be clear here, guys. This country hasn't always been the best. about being on target with certain issues at the time it should have been. There have been multiple times that our government basically was a little bit too late. Look how long it took the US government to actually acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Look how long it took the US government under Bill Clinton's presidency to admit that what was happening in Rwanda was actually a genocide. We haven't always been the best and timely when it comes to calling out these issues.
Iran's regime's current position in relation to Israel.
The Iranians believe that Israel does not have moral legitimacy as an apartheid regime. And the only way that it can gain legitimacy is that if apartheid is cast aside, if ethno-supremacism is cast aside, if racial and religious discrimination in the sense that Muslims and Christians are lesser human beings and they don't have any right to the land that they've been on for hundreds of years, that should be set aside. People who have been expelled have the right of return. It's not very complicated. It's not, as you say, rocket science.
Well, it may not be complicated to you, but what looks complicated to us is that what Iran has been doing in the last few years, if not decades, has been supporting via proxy groups like the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, funding and helping to train them to commit acts of war against Israel, firing endless rockets, and as we saw on October the 7th, committing an act of heinous terrorism. So it's not quite as simple as you're trying to picture this, is it? Iran has had a vested interest in supporting terror against Israel for a very long time.
No, I think the regimes that have a vested interest in supporting terrorism are the ones who are giving the Israeli regime the weapons to carry out genocide. And the genocide began long before October the 7th. And the Gaza Strip was a concentration camp long before October the 7th. You know as well as I that October the 7th didn't occur in a vacuum. And the terrorism has been carried out regularly by the Israeli regime on the Palestinians of the Gaza Strip for decades. It regularly bombed them and killed them. And it's not just the Gaza Strip. I think roughly 400 Palestinians have been murdered in the West Bank over the past 6 months. These are regular occurrences, but it doesn't register in the West because, again, the Israelis are they are European. It's a European colony. They have priorities over the brown people of the land. But it is a fact that Palestinian children, according to the statements made by senior Israeli officials, Palestinian women, according to members of the Knesset, they are lesser people. If you look at the South African complaint, they clearly point out the views of these people and the starvation siege and the intention to starve the people of Gaza, women and children. That is because they look at them as inferior people. This is not about two armies. This is about a subjugated people trying to stand up for their rights. If you were in Germany,
and how would you? Let me ask you, Professor.
We'll stop it there for just a second. I guess he told him, right? Notice he called out the European part in reference to Israel. Whoa. Whoa. That is very important. And no, it's not complicated. And I hate when people say that, oh, well, it's very complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's not complex. I understand it. I think a lot of you understand it, right? They say it's complicated because they don't want you to understand and they don't want people to actually admit that Israel is an apartheid state. They don't want people to actually see that Israel is committing genocide, that they are oppressing the Palestinian people. They've been doing that for years. They don't want people to see that Israel wants to have ethnic cleansing. So instead of telling you the truth, they tell you it's complicated. Shout out to Professor Morandi there. Now, what's going to happen from here, folks? Now, Al Jazeera is calling this out. Israeli attack on nuclear sites to prompt tit for tat pursuing nukes Iran. And this is what I was afraid of, right? Again, I told you Iran has powerful weapons and capability. Iran warns Israel that if it goes ahead with a retaliation for last week's attack, Tehran will respond in kind and also pursue a nuclear weapon. Listen to this. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has warned that it would attack Israel's nuclear sites and may pursue a nuclear weapon if the country strikes Iran's nuclear facilities. And this is what I mean when I say heading into World War III. This is not a game. This is not something that you can play around with. In Israel, they've been pushing people around for a long time, man. Israel has been that big, chubby bully that, won't leave anybody alone. They pick on everybody around them. And you know what happens with bullies? You know what happens if you don't fight back? They'll just continue to do it. No one has put Israel in their place. And that's part of the problem. And not just the United States, but the other Western allies as well. It took South Africa to stand up and bring Israel to the ICJ so that the entire world can see what Israel was doing. South Africa isn't foolish. They know the ICJ isn't going to enforce anything, but they did this to show the world what Israel is really about. We can go to the second part of Type V and C, Eric, when you're ready. I would assume that Iran is not playing around here, and it would not surprise me if they did also issue some type of another retaliatory response to Israel. And this time, I don't think it'll be like it was the first time. This time, I think that they would go a lot harder. And honestly, if I was Israel, I wouldn't want to mess with Iran right now. And again, if you're watching and you're in the military, you have the opportunity to get out. Now would be the time to leave. If you are a parent and you have kids that are thinking about joining the military, now would be the time to tell them that is not a good idea. Don't let your kids go off to fight these wars, killing brown people abroad for a country that doesn't even fight for them.